I find I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and there are way too many pessimistic people in the world who say you can't or you shouldn't or it ain't gonna work or whatever. And a lot of my team would say some of the stuff that we're into now that we're doing really well, they were like, don't do it.
They thought it was crazy.
They thought it was nuts.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. I am really excited for our guest today. This episode's been a long time in the making. I'm with Michael Polo, founder and president of Acmt. Mike, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, it's the Made in America podcast, so we're going to start off with our same two questions. What do you make, and why do you make it?
So Acmt is a complex sheet metal fabrication composite manufacturer. So we're a fabrication house, not a machining house, although we do machining. And we make everything we make flies. And now we're getting into some ground generation and solar stuff as well. And we make it because, that's a good question. My dad owned a company before I did, a manufacturing company, and I swore I would never get into aerospace manufacturing. And then he kind of sucked me in on summers, and the rest is history.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So you swore you weren't going to get in. Why?
Because he was always working. My father, grew a business, and so we kind of saw him. My mom came to a lot of our stuff, and Dad came late, all that. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do this. This is kind of, crazy stuff. But that being said. I honestly don't remember my father, and he knows this. I don't remember my father till I was probably about 13, 14, because he was always working,
And then what in your teenage years, he got you coming to the shops in the summers?
Yeah, we started working there summers, and of course we did he made us do all the worst stuff in those shops, and we had to do the longest hours, and he planned it that way. He at the time had a partner who did the exact opposite, and it was such an eye-opening experience to realize that by giving your kids more, it made them
appreciate it less?
Much less, yeah.
So giving you the hardest, longest hours, worst jobs inspired your love of manufacturing?
No, but it inspired my love for working, and again, that really didn't drag me into the owning my own company type of thing. So when I go to schools, I always say to the kids, I'll give you $50 to figure out what I went to school for. And so they usually say computers or engineering or business. I'm a licensed cosmetologist. So I always say, so the bridge is, my cousin was a very successful hairdresser, and I have the gift of gab, so he said, you should really be a hairdresser. So I did. I went to California, and then my dad had a friend who owned a business who I was looking for a part-time job because I wasn't making any money in hairdressing when I came back to Connecticut. And from that part-time job, it ended up becoming ultimately what my company is.
So let's run through this story. So the $50 answer is cosmetology.
Yes.
And so what?
Well, now I can't say it anymore because everyone's going to know it.
That's right. Not $50 anymore.
Exactly.
Sorry, we've let the whole secret out. But so what? So your first thought was what? You just know someone who's in the cosmetology business, so let me give it a go.
Yeah. No, I have a cousin who was really successful in it, and I was never the go to college kid.
Yeah.
I was the DF student who was very creative and had to compliment my teachers to get through school. And it was funny because I always hung out with the really smart kids, so they all thought I was smart, but I was not. I had to get creative to graduate.
Did you not like school? Because, I think I just want to, this is important because, one of the things we talk about a lot, both here on the podcast and I think generally is like college isn't for everybody, but that doesn't mean, and you're an example of, that doesn't mean you can't be extremely successful in your chosen field. So did you always find school difficult?
Well, back then when I was doing when my parents were sending me to all the children's hospital, they didn't know what ADD was and all that stuff, and that was what it was. And so they didn't know how to treat it in schools, and teachers didn't really know it, and so it was so different back then.
Back in the day when they would call kids like hyper.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Or special needs. So I would go into a different class, or we had A's, B's, and C's, and I was always a C. I always acted like the A, but I was always a C.
Yeah.
And like my senior year in high school, I got most popular because it was all about that. I had to do that to get through school, because if I was relying on book smarts and reading and math, I'd still be there.
So you get through high school on your charm, let's say.
Definitely.
And then you thought, what, school's not for me, so college isn't in the cards, but something with my hands, something that's really people focused, that was the idea?
Yep, definitely.
And were you like interested in hairdressing? Like, was
Not
it?
really. No.
Okay.
No. But it was I found out really early that there's a lot of girls in hairdressing.
There is.
And so that helped. All my friends really hung out with me a lot and came to visit and got free haircuts and stuff like that. So that worked out well. And so that was and so right at first, my dad owns a business then, right? So I'm like, I want to own my own salon. And Dad's like, no. So we did schools, and he said, Michael, you have to stick with something. I was one of those guys that, if you haven't figured it out, I have ADD, so I'm jumping in a lot of things. And so he would say, once you do it for like 5 years, let's talk to me. And so I went from working in salons to a friend of his needed someone to do some work.
What was the business? What was
it was a paint company that had a little chemical company on the side, and they did Pratt work. And so that guy knew that Dad was really, really tight with Pratt, and so he said to me, "You don't have to know anything. Just just be a voice for us." And of course, I didn't take him up on it. I actually started learning stuff, and then I stopped hairdressing and actually went and worked for him full time. And we grew the business, and we had a lot of fun. And so, as the story goes, my dad and he met, and my dad said, "Listen, Michael's doing really good at this, so why don't we make a deal that if whatever money you make, we split it, and then Michael can buy into buying the business." And they agreed. Well, that's not how it happened. So No. So what happened is he was taking 50% of all of his stuff. So the car, all that stuff. And so it ended up where after the first year, my dad goes, "I really don't care. Just make a journal entry and give my son something." And so he actually got a little mad at my dad. And so one day I got fired. And I drove over to my dad's building, and I said, "I just got fired." And Dad said, "Really?" And so I got a phone call from the chief buyer at Pratt, who said, "We like you, and we've always respected you, and you know a lot." And so he signed me up to get a supplier code and set up a business. And I was a phone on my dad's side desk for about 3 months until we built a clean room, because I needed clean rooms for it. And
so let's kind of unpack a little bit here. So the paint business had a side business of doing chemicals for aerospace.
Yes.
What were the chemicals?
Adhesives. So that's why the original name was Acmt, Adhesive and Chemical, because we were a packaging house.
And so so you learned all about the chemicals. How long were you in that?
About 2 years.
And so you not only do you learning what to do, but you're developing the relationship with the customer, which lesson learned, kids. That's where the real value is.
Yeah. And driving things and picking up things, and really vested in that.
So when you left, did they move the business that you were doing there over to you?
No. So a couple of the suppliers did move with me, and I ended up getting sued for it. And ultimately, the company that was suing me, lost. And up until they just got sold recently, they would never do business with me. Like, I would call. We're talking. I'm in business 36 years, and I would call, and I'd meet him because he lives in Florida now. I'd meet him at the airport, and he was nice to me. And I go, "Can I buy?" "Nope, he's not going to let you buy anything from him." And just recently, like I want to say 2 weeks ago, they sold the business, and I got a phone call and said, you could start buying stuff from us. I'm like, wow, thanks.
Wow. Well, people have long memories.
And by the way, they're a great little company. And I said to them, if I could have bought it, I probably would have, but he would have never sold it to me. He would have buried it before he sold it to me.
So tell us about how you kind of got off the ground. So you got a phone at the side of your father's desk.
Yep.
And you're getting going. What happens from there? How do you get it off the ground? How do you get started?
So it basically started out as clean room repackaging of buying things in bulk and putting them into cartridges and quarts and all that. And So the first thing is you got to go back to Pratt and get a supplier code. That's number one. And then you got to go through all their qualities. Now, it's a lot different 36 years ago than it is now. But back then, the purchasing people had all the strength of getting this stuff done. And my dad knew a lot of people as well, which didn't hurt. And so we rented an really old building in Manchester on the third floor. I would lug 5-gallon pails up the stairs and get ready. Oh, yeah. And my next door neighbor's father built it out with plexiglass windows, all that stuff. So it was really makeshift. And the first year, we did nothing. We did like $200,000. The second year, we did about $750,000. And then before you know it, I'm getting orders from airlines and things are going, and I start branching out right away in things that other company wasn't doing. And that was a key.
So when you're making adhesives, I don't think I fully appreciate in the beginning here. When you're saying packaging, help me understand.
So materials come in cartridges, like 6-ounce cartridges, but you can buy it in bulk and buy the cartridge and put it in yourself, and you actually can save money instead of buying it from them in that same package. So what you make in one cartridge, if you sell the whole thing, you probably make 80% more.
And what are they using the cartridge for?
For bonding pieces of jet engines together. It's really strong stuff, like high temp.
Yeah, this isn't Gorilla Glue.
No. It's really strong stuff. Very, very engineered and very, very technical.
So who, like the prime engine contractors, buy this stuff? So when they're assembling the engines, this is what they're using to.
And then they're also in the repair world, because now we have a repair station. We repair the same parts that we apply that material to. Right. So think of it as a tire of a car. Every time an engine gets tore down, and they redo it, all the rubber areas that are between the seals between anything that rotates, they got to strip it all out and redo it, because it's kind of like puts a fingerprint of whatever that shaft was. And so what they do is they remold it, and then it builds its own fingerprint into it. And then when they tear it down, so I get the same parts over and over again if they tear the engine down, and I just keep re-putting rubber onto it.
Gotcha.
That type of stuff.
So it's the original engine build plus all the maintenance and repair work. You getting pieces of that.
Yeah, and they're such different businesses, and so if you do that both militarily and commercial, that's really 4 facets of a business that at any one time, one is up and one is down. So you're really kind of controlling your own, volume of work.
Yeah, sort of help flatten out those.
That original company only repackaged. I went ahead and built clean rooms and started applying all those products. And that's where my business, that's why I changed the name, because I'm no longer adhesive and chemicals. I'm now applying composite materials, and that's how we changed into ACMT.
To ACMT, yep. Yeah. So let's kind of pull that apart and spend some time talking about that conversion. So, I mean, in the beginning, AdChem's just repackaging chemicals, but you guys got away from that and started doing a lot more value add. So maybe talk through that kind of process. How did you grow out of that, and what does the business look like today?
Well, it's so our original first big customer was Pratt Whitney North Berwick, Maine, and which that facility, they all moved overseas. But so when I was up there, they started saying how, boy, if we could do this, if we could use this for this and not do all that, what they call touch labor. So I said, we'll do the touch labor. So we actually started figuring out how to transition stuff like that, and I've noticed that in my work business, that how it works out is we always start out doing something. And then as you grow the business, that something is kind of small or doesn't fit in with the core. So you kind of transition to someone else, and then you move up the food chain. And so as your parts get bigger, you start subbing out other things that used to be a core, but it's no longer a core because you're growing into different specialties. And that was one of them. So I would do that. And then what I would do is, the one thing that made me different is I would then go to all the cities that had repair, and I would chase engines. So I would drive my car, and they'd be towing engine in Miami is a big repair hub, and I would follow the engine, and I'd go in the thing, and I'd say, or go in the office and say, "Hi, I'm Michael. Those adhesives that go to that engine, I supplied those parts." And then the buyer would eventually call me, and I'd quote that, and he'd say, the problem is it's a 6-ounce cartridge. I really only need 3 ounces. I said, well, I can customize that, and I'll make it a 3-ounce for you. And I usually charge almost as much as a 6-ounce. But he didn't care because he didn't have to buy it in bulk or anything like that. Right. And so I built a whole business around custom packaging, which was even beyond what the original packaging concepts were.
And so you just decided, I'll figure out where the engine get repaired. You just look for trucks carrying engines?
All the time, yeah. Or they tow them. So an engine goes in a stand, and when they're moving around, especially in Miami, because they go to different buildings for different things. And you could get it close to airports then. You can't get close anymore.
No,
See, the whole world has changed.
Okay.
So at that time, you can get really close to where they repair the aircraft and all that stuff. And just by talking to people and telling them what you're doing and being inquisitive, it was great. Now it's a different world.
Now it's a different world. Well, good for you. That means there can't be another mini Michael Polo going around following engines.
Not
right?
as easy. Not as easy.
Not as easy. So you're beyond engines now. You talked about composites. You talked about sort of fab. So how did you guys expand beyond that? And something. Look, you've been very successful, and I think. You always hear in business, right? You got to stick to your core. You got to stick to your core. But then you also, at some points, have to expand if you want to expand.
Definitely.
So how did you make those decisions?
So we did it by a company in Holland had gone out of business, and a friend of mine knew them, and it was a repair station, an FAA repair station. And I always wanted to get into repair because all those engines I'm tracking are FAA repair stations. And so I want to now start moving up the food chain. So I buy a company out, and the general manager who lost his job ends up coming on board with us, and we start building this, what I would call a very small business. We called it AIS, Aero Industrial Services. And it grew way too fast. Now, again, this is like 1980, 89, 1991 type of time frame. That business starts growing crazy, and because he's got a friend of his that comes on board who's really connected to some of the bigger suppliers. So we then have to go get our FAA tag. The FAA guys come, they certify us, and then that's going really, really well. If I knew now what I know now, it'd be a huge business. But I didn't, and so I made some very strategic, what I would call mistakes now. And grew way fast. And
what were those mistakes?
So one of the biggest ones was the guy that I hired was the production manager, but I also had him as my quality manager. You never do that in business. They're totally separate things, because the priorities of one is different than the priorities of the other. And I'm not saying that. So what happened is we ended up getting into this situation where, you remember ValueJet went down? Mm-hmm. We get dragged into that because one of our customers, the FAA thinks, we repaired their parts. We never did. Okay. It didn't make a difference. It was already out there, and it was already a perception in the world to where we got totally exonerated years later, but it didn't make a difference. I lost that whole business, disappeared because of that ValueJet situation. So now we're a little company, we're 5 people, we're doing a lot of really cool stuff, and the FAA overtakes us, and I ended up paying all the bills, and I shut the company down. And then, 5 years later, they say, nope, you didn't do anything wrong. Well, the company's gone. But I transitioned into knowing more and changed it so where now I'm only repairing my parts, not other people's parts. You understand? So what I did was I worked with Pratt, and all the parts that I was engineering source approved on, I became repair source approved. And so whenever they came back for repair, I would get them.
So you're basically, you sell them the part originally, it needs a repair, kind of makes sense, right? It's like going back to the dealership to get them to do it. Just want to go back to, it's an interesting business lesson here. So AIS is growing.
Yeah.
But it seems like the ValueJet seems like a black swan event out of your control. You didn't fly the jet, you didn't crash the jet, you didn't do anything wrong. But you also alluded to the fact that the idea of having your production supervisor be your quality supervisor, clearly a problem there, right? Because production's trying to get them out the door.
Definitely.
Quality's supposed to make sure production's doing what they're...
By the way, either one of those, you would have done great.
Right.
Just both of together causes a problem.
So, but how did that end up with the ValueJet problem, or what was the...
Well, because the parts that we're talking about are rotating parts, and so the inspection criteria for those was set in stone. When the FAA came into inspect, now again, none of the parts on ValueJet ever came into our shop. They thought they did because the serial numbers were transposed.
Got it.
So when they did the investigation, there's a piece of equipment that you needed that we didn't have, and so they asked this guy, God's honest truth, they asked this guy, so if that's what's needed, how did you inspect it? And he said, I have a calibrated eye. And so, I swear to God, so the FAA guy walked into my office and said, you have 2 options. If you pull the tag off the wall and give it to me, you can work to get it back. If I pull it off, it's a federal investigation. So I took the CAG off the wall. I handed it to him. I fired that guy, those two guys, and I changed the way we did things.
Lesson learned.
Huge lesson learned.
But you think had that mistake not happened, why do you think the business would have gotten so big?
Well, because then we would have hired, because now you start hiring people in those roles, you know?
And then bing, bang, boom, there it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're out of the repair business. Now you're back in it.
Yep.
What else are you guys doing? You mentioned composites. I mean, you guys have done a ton with tech. Talk about that.
Yeah, so we've gotten ourselves into, as I alluded to, I have ADD, so we're into a lot of different things. And we've gotten ourselves into a lot of technology stuff. So we hired about, I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, an automation electronics guy who I went to high school with. And it's a great, because now we actually develop our own technology. And I realized years ago that finding good help is difficult. And some things never change.
Yeah.
So what we do, what our goal is on anything new is we develop a piece of equipment with computers that will do the tough part, that part that has to stay locked in. So I always say taking out needless variation, because you don't want anything variation, and then hiring people to put parts in and taking parts out. So the labor becomes the people, and then the technology does the work.
So all the people are doing is programming and loading?
Yes. That being said, that's very simple.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's being said, but we're then using that as our feeder to if you got shiny eyes and you got it, now we start moving you up the chain and you train your low, your entry level person, and then they do it, and they do the job, and then you start doing other things. And so I've got an intern now who is now a junior engineer. I've got another who came out of the synergy class who's now a value stream supervisor, and she's 22 years old.
Wow. And
she's a rock star.
What's the synergy class?
So it's the class that I would have been in if I were in high school.
Okay.
The class that they really don't, they're not studious, and they're kind of in a separate school that is challenged.
Got it.
But many of those are me.
Right.
And many of those have the drive and we're visual. We're not repetition and visually, I can pick up anything. Reading it in a book, forget about it.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question about that. So, tons of manufacturers out there, right, would love to hire people like you, right? And tons of people like you would love to find a great career. So do you have a different interview process that's sort of non-standard to sort of find those people who are more visual learners?
Yeah. I hire on attitude. Everything is attitude. So if I get, and I've done it a ton of times, if I'm at Dunkin' Donuts and the man or woman in that has a great attitude, I give them my business card and say, if you want to change your career, come work with us. Because I can teach them all the other stuff if they're coming to work every day and they got a positive attitude, and if they can bob and weave sometimes, hopefully that helps. Yeah. But I hire on that, and I have a guy that's with us now. I think it's been like 15 years, he just told me, and I hired him. He walked by going for a quality role, and I said, we're going to hire that guy. He didn't get the quality role. But he ended up becoming in engineering, and now he's the head of our estimating department.
But your recruiting strategy can't be Michael Polo going to Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, no. It's all. But my team does the same thing.
They do.
So I've trained. Yeah, we've trained. You got to go a step out of the box. It's kind of like. I love this model. So Scott Livingston, a horse who goes to the car shows and they train, because they're mechanical. That type of. You really got to. We're looking at the best people that do the best stuff, and to do that, a lot of it's not the traditional ways of doing it, because technically the best people are working. So You got to figure out how you're going to lure them in. We tend to have a really good track record of once they walk the shop and they see what we're doing, we get, because we do a lot of different stuff.
So when you have them come in, by the way, first of all, I should probably close the loop on that on the Scott Livingston comment, just so everyone knows. But I think what you were trying to say is, no, it's fine. Yeah. What you're trying to say is he goes to like car shows and he gets involved with that stuff, because the people who are kind of gearheads that work on cars would also be great in his shop. So it's a real opportunity to give someone that opportunity, and you kind of take the same approach.
Very creative, very, very creative. Yeah.
So when you're interviewing somebody, you say someone, let's take the Dunkin' Donuts example. The person does call you, they come in. what is an interview at ACMT? What's it like? You have them walk the shop. What else? How do you sort of figure out, is the attitude real? Do they have enough bob and weave? Do they have enough, I think we could call it enough give a damn and hustle, right? Because that's what you're looking for, give a damn and hustle.
Yeah. So I want to start by saying there are many resumes that do not fit the person. So if you're hiring on resumes, you can get disappointed very easily. Some people put on resumes things that are not representative of them, and vice versa. Some people come in for one role, and when you're talking to them, you realize they won't be good for that role, but they'd be really good for this role. So, and that's how we do it. HR, and I never respected HR when I was a smaller business until now. It's a really, really important piece. But the way we interview is we usually, depending on what the role is, we'll have other people in the room. Because I noticed early on, I had some great quality people who were horrible interviewers. And we lost some really good talent because they didn't interview well. I had one guy that would never hire anyone that was smarter, which never. And so what he would do is he'd say, we should get him trained. Oh no, we don't train him because then he's going to leave. Are you kidding me? No, you want him to get trained and stay.
That's right.
So, you know what I mean? It's that type of stuff. So I would embed.
How did you conquer that? Right. I'm sure there's tons of people listening who have the person A that is uncomfortable hiring someone who might challenge them or who's smarter, and tons of people that they're not filling roles because we're not interviewing. Right. How did you conquer that challenge?
I exited him, and he now works at Pratt Whitney. Very, very good friend. I still see him all the time.
Do you train people to do interviewing?
Yes.
Through your HR team?
Yeah.
Because you had mentioned, you said something I'll pull up real quick here, which is you said as a smaller business, you didn't respect HR, and now you do. Why? What changed?
Well, so when we're a smaller business and we don't have HR, my dad, myself, we become HR. And then you start realizing that's a bad thing, right? Because now, it's not standard. There's, and so years ago, we hired our first HR person. I want to say in 2003 type of time frame, and then we've had three different ones. And then during the pandemic, we actually let our HR person go because why? Because you're letting people go, and we're not hiring anyone. So that's a payroll that we could use to survive, And then we hired another one who's now a rock star. She's she's a licensed engineer who's our HR manager. So she gets the other side, which is phenomenal.
That must be very interesting.
Phenomenal.
So what do you task HR with doing at ACMT?
Well, making sure that everyone plays well together. That's a big deal because, all we're doing is managing to personalities. It's all personalities. So everything has to be on standard work and controlled. And then you have people that do things that fire themselves. I say we hired, I want to say 35 people this year. We really only needed to hire 25, but 10 have fired themselves over something dumb that they've done, And I say it that way because I beg people to just stick to your lane. Don't meddle in another thing, because what happens is, that one bad apple, those things in manufacturing play a major role because you've got a team of people, and then if you got people that are meddling and causing problems, it causes problems for the whole team, not just for the
area. You're talking about cultural issues or technical issues?
Cultural
issues.
Which ultimately can cause technical issues.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Well, actually, you pulled on something I wanted to ask you about, because I know that over the last couple of years through the pandemic, it's been a bit of a herky-jerky personnel ride. And so maybe I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts around, where were you from a staffing level sort of coming into 2020? How far did it go, and how far is it coming back?
Yeah, so we grew from 18 to 19, we grew 70%. And then 19 was rocking. And then 20,
not as good.
The wheels fall off the cart, and we go from, I want to say, 165 people down to 71. And we're just trying to maintain. And at the time, so we have what we call our Building 2, which is strictly for all the new Pratt growth engines. And part of that, we have 100% of contracts. So we own a piece of business that we signed an LTA, $168 million LTA for the next 13 years, that we just make these parts. Well, now you have commercial airlines that stopped flying. And so the first thing Pratt says is, hey guys, we don't need any parts till what they had said next April, which is a year later. And I'm like, I just spent a year and a half building a team that can do all this great stuff. And if I shut the door and then you tell me to turn it on, it's going to take me another 2 years to rebuild it because it's not easy to do. So they allow me to limp along. What they do is they pull schedule in from 23 and 22 into 20 and 21 to just do enough to keep me limping along. It was incredibly difficult. Never want to go through it again. Although, we learned a lot of good stuff and a lot of really tough stuff. We had, in that building alone, we were down to, I want to say, like 9 people. That building,
from a high of,
we're at like 39 right now, and we're running 2 shifts. Running product. But thank God, Pratt stepped up and said, yeah, and those relationships in those tough times are the most important relationships, because I'm talking to, senior vice presidents who got us here, and very, very fragilely, you can ruin this thing pretty quickly, because eventually, like right now, when they push the pedal, you better have resources that are going to get them what they need.
Yeah, they don't want to hear I can't deliver because whatever. You got to get there. Yeah. So you went 160 down to like 71. Where are you guys at today?
We're up to 115. So
the hiring's just cranking.
Yeah, we have a couple. I think 2 more, and then I think we're good through. In the next year we have another 42% growth. So it's going to be another craziness.
So how do you think about that sort of talent gap, right? Because you had people, you presume that when you're up to 171, a lot of these people are experienced, been around for a long time. Then you're back down. Now you got to ramp back up. So presumably you're bringing in people that don't have the experience, because the people that you let go probably weren't waiting around for you.
Yep.
So how do you get them up to speed fast enough to meet customer demand?
It's a really good question. So you're also hiring 3 to keep 1, because 2 of them are probably not going to make it. In those crazy times, we also had, so in our really big growth, that's 70%, we would have an 8 a.m. Pratt meeting every morning with the head of engineering, who would be delegating all of this stuff. And so at the time, we're developing a process. So going back, we make a part that an incumbent was making, but they needed another source, because everything needs to have 2 sources or a plan for how you're going to do it as a single source. So we get called to make these parts. We have no idea what they are. So Pratt says, we want you to try this, and if it works, let us know. So we do, and we become successful. And so a team comes in, and again, we don't know what the project is, but I can tell it's kind of big, because you're getting a lot of engineers that are coming in. We develop a process, and Pratt Whitney does a fit test, and 100% of ours fit, and only 30% of theirs fit. So they shut them off, and now this engineering manager says, okay, now you're 3,900 parts behind.
No.
Swear to God. So now she's telling us to throw parts into this to start growing, and meanwhile, we don't even have a really process. She don't care. She said, I'll buy everything that you make, just make it, because I need to start putting blades onto engines. Pratt Whitney at the time is selling engines with no blades on them, because the assembly process was so complex. Now it's a walk in the park, but back then it was difficult. So we're doing this, running with our hair on fire, and one of my very good friends said at the time, don't read any books, because what you're saying you're going to do is impossible to do. But we did it. And that's all because this lady was so focused on just barreling through stuff. And she would have, so we were doing everything in our building 1. We took over building 2, and now we're moving all the equipment, and it's an engineering source approved package process. ESA is Pratt has to come in and bless everything, everything. So it's hot presses. We put computers and brains on presses and lock the process in. So I have to move them from building 1 to building 2 during production, full production. So she says, so I disconnect the presses on Monday. Tuesday, the riggers come in and move it Tuesday and Wednesday. They rewire them on Thursday, and ESA is there on Friday. I'm running production parts on Saturday morning.
No kidding.
Which, if you told me that, it's impossible. But it happened because they needed these parts.
Well, when someone needs you, it's amazing what they can get done, right?
And so one of my favorite parts of that is a year later, I'm in a production meeting and we have to ship 3,800 pieces. And in the production meeting, we only shipped 35. And so I say, the customer requires 38. We got to get 38. And Kathy, our supply chain manager, planning and scheduling, says, just to give you a little levity, last year on this day we shipped 400. Swear. So I went, okay, we're okay.
We're okay. We'll get there. We'll get there.
So we did what we had to, but we also patented some processes to lock it in and things like that. We got invited to Made in America when the president had Pratt Whitney go to Washington, D.C. So Bob Ledoux invited us, and Bob Ledoux said to Dad and I, you guys solved a major problem. We can't thank you enough because we're now shipping engines with blades on them.
So have you've patented some of these processes and technologies you guys have made?
Yeah, definitely.
And just stuff that you guys have invented along the way to help to drive value and
and the key areas, especially like groundbreaking stuff. We have
what's something cool that.
So we have a fully automated heat treat furnace, quench heat treat furnace that is one of the key processes of our sheet metal fan blade covers, and we patented the whole thing. So so we have people that put parts into fixtures and lock them down, and then the computer and the machines do everything, and then they come back and the dolly comes up and they take the parts off and they wash them and they put them away and then they put the new parts in and it just keeps processing parts. We tried getting the local heat treaters to do it, and then that lady at Pratt Whitney said, oh, no, you're going to develop it yourself. And we're like, we never heat treated anything. And she's like, oh, no, you're going to develop it. So I have a friend of mine who is now a next door neighbor who is a heat treat genius, and he was retired. And I called him up and he went, you're nuts. And I said, we're going to do it. And now he says.
And boom, you did it, patented it, and there you go.
Yeah.
Necessity, the mother of invention.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're getting close to the end of the time, but I did want to talk a little bit about, you guys have expanded into Florida, opened a facility there. Talk a little bit about why and how that's all going.
So that originally started because we're 100% a contract. And so Pratt required us to start looking at dual sourcing stuff. It has changed since then. We were originally going to be in West Palm just because Pratt's in West Palm, so that's where I incorporated. And it ended up where I didn't realize until afterwards that all the counties have their own economic development and their own funding. So now I start bidding it out. Well, we have a customer in Alabama who's now our largest customer in that facility. So we were going to build a building. We ended up, there was an old bankrupt Honeywell building, 141,000 square feet on 36 acres of land, hadn't been in business for years. So I buy it out of bankruptcy and write a check on my birthday in September for $14,000 for insurance. Hurricane Michael hits October 10th, 189-mile-an-hour winds, rips the roof off, knocks the walls down, blows the building apart. And $3.5 million later in insurance money, I've got a new building that is now hurricane proof. So Hurricane Michael saved us. And so, and we do some really cool stuff there. So we have like our air conditioners are natural gas, and we really try doing as much environmentally friendly stuff. But that's all big parts. So there we make 22-foot long hot form titanium parts. The incumbent that makes them now is in California. They use about 36 people. That business is doing that same work with 9.
9 people.
9. We were higher, and then we.
So there's airframe parts going on down there, as opposed to the chemical
and it's military.
Adhesive stuff down there. All military.
All
down
military.
there.
Yep.
It's probably was a pretty good thing to have a little extra military in your back pocket over the last period of time.
Definitely.
So before I go to rapid fire round, Michael, what's the future of ACMT look like? What do you see coming down the road? It's
a good question. We tend to like getting into the really bizarre stuff. We measure Swiss cheese on CMMs, which is, we do some crazy stuff, and people walk through and go, what are you doing? But it builds a really good business. So we like being that company that does things that not everyone would do, especially, so those niches. So that's what we look for. We look for the kind of difficult things, old programs that need new flair to them to get them done. We're working on a project now that is 45 years old. It's 18 feet of weld, and we're gonna do it automated with robots. Not all of it, but a lot of it, because people do it by hand and it takes time. So looking at complex things and how to make them better.
So is that kind of really, it sounds like you guys are developing some serious like IP, intellectual property.
Definitely.
And looking at trying to solve long-term problems with new technology that could be faster and more efficient, taking something that might have 36 people and figure out a way to do it with 9 people, do it faster and more effectively.
And the only way you can do that is by signing long-term agreements. Because if I have a 10-year LTA, I can invest millions now knowing I've got 10 years to develop it. And that's what that whole thing was. It was a lot of long-term planning that you can invest in technology and then add the people to it.
You still have the passion and energy to keep rocking on?
Yeah, I'm loving it.
Yeah.
Loving it. Coming off of these past 2 years has been incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Because now we're in a big growth mode, but you've got 2 bad years. So that's kind of taken some of the wind out of my sails, but we'll get there.
Once you get back on the upswing, those 2 years will be a distant memory.
From your lips to God's ears.
There we go. All right. Let's do some rapid fire round to wrap it up. You ready?
Yep.
Red Sox or Yankees?
Yankees.
Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks?
Dunkin' Donuts.
Sports car or SUV?
Sports car.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Staycation or exotic destination?
Exotic destinations.
There you go. Do you have a favorite business book?
The Goal.
The Goal. That's
Goal.
a good one.
Yep.
If you could do anything in the world with your time and it had to be something other than the president of ACMT, what would you do?
You had to say it had to be something other than A's because I love my job. I'd do something else. Probably a tour guide in Italy.
A tour guide in Italy? Mm-hmm. Is that your favorite vacation spot?
It's my favorite place in the world, yeah.
Is it any particular place in Italy?
No, anywhere from Sicily up. I've got my favorite places, but yeah.
Fantastic. What's one thing that you learned early in your life or early in your career, Michael, that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Don't give up.
Don't give up. And what's something that you've learned later in your life or later in your career that if you went back and told young Michael and he listened to you, you think it'd have a real positive impact on his life?
I would probably say don't give up anyway, but and don't listen to others.
Don't listen to others. What do you mean?
I find I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and there are way too many pessimistic people in the world who say you can't or you shouldn't or it ain't going to work or whatever. And a lot of my team would say some of the stuff that we're into now that we're doing really well, they were like, don't do it.
They thought it was crazy.
They thought it was nuts.
So I know this is rapid fire, but I'm going to elaborate. I'll let you elaborate or ask you a follow-up question because, I'm the host and I get to do stuff like that. There's got to be some times, right, where the answer is you got to stop, right? Mm-hmm. So you try some crazy stuff. So how do you know when it's time to throw in the towel and when it's time to never give up?
That's probably a really good question. I think it would only have to be if it was something that was technically impossible or not available. I read people, and when people bring things to me that are different, I automatically see that it could be an opportunity. So I'll never forget it. My first financial person who has since left us said, I will never question you again when we went through our building 2 stuff because she thought we were nuts. We had to come up buy our largest piece of equipment ever on a contract that we didn't sign because we needed a 52-week lead time to have it built. It was a robot, and I did it, and she thought I was nuts. And from that, we got our building 2. So crazy. But I was dealing with Pratt people who were looking me in the eye, and I knew that they knew they could ruin me just by talking the talk but not walking the walk. So
that's where you feel like the reading people is really key in. Because, the way you say it, someone could hear it, that's like, oh man, it's crazy. Michael's just on a lark, making this thing. But it's really not on a lark. You understand the need from the customer. You've looked them in the eye. You have the confidence they're going to go somewhere. And then you take that first step. It's almost like the leap, but whatever. But then you're moving that first step. And it almost makes what could happen, makes it actually happen.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Well, listen, man, it's super inspiring. Hard act to follow, but certainly something to strive for. Thanks so much for coming on, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.